kind of looking for comments on the options that we're presenting for that project. First exhibit is just the project area, and the piece we're talking about is Millwood Drive from County Road 48, Highland Scenic Drive, all the way up to Foley Road. Just some of the background on the project. It is currently in the CIP and the pavement management plan to be reconstructed in 2023. It's all R1 properties, so no mixed zoning, so it makes assessments a little easier. Existing roadway is 36 feet wide with curb and gutter. 12-foot trail. One of the major issues with this roadway is that trail, and it's currently not ADA compliant with all those driveway crossings. The trail is right behind the curb. You'll see that on the typical sections when we go through that. As a state aid route, about 1,900 cars per day. And then in 2000, the roadway was constructed along with the storm sewer trail and sanitary sewer. And then in 1979, 1981, that's when the water went in. And there might be some issues with the water. If you recall, we did that study a while back. The hydrants on this project will have to get fixed. There is a part of them that does deteriorate over time. And then this is also part of the project where it might be plastic water main fees, so that will have to be included in the project as well. I'm going to kind of go, I'm not going to go through these existing conditions drawings, kind of jump right into proposed improvements, and I think I'll talk on the typical sections. So the top section here is the existing section. This is looking at it from looking at it to the north. So on the southbound lane, there's an 8-foot parking lane, and there's a 14-foot drive lane, a 12.5-foot drive lane. You got the curb, and then that trail sits right behind the curb and gutter. And that's where we have the ADA issues at all those driveway crossings. And that entire section is centered in that 66-foot wide right-of-way. It does vary in some spots, it's a little bit wider than 66 feet, but for the most part, it's 66 feet wide. So the first option that we looked at was basically keeping the roadway the way it is right now. 8-foot parking lane, 14-foot drive lane, 12-foot drive lane, but pushing that trail out to make it easier to meet ADA and all those driveway entrances. That just allows us to get that slope for the driveway, kind of match that trail grade so we don't have that issue. So we would be going down to a 10-foot wide trail versus a 12, and that's just to save on property acquisition. When we're pushing that trail out, it doesn't leave a lot of room for utilities in there. We can still do it within the existing right-of-way, but we kind of take past practices to move those utilities from underneath the trail, get it outside the roadway, so we got to give them somewhere to go. So with this option, you would be doing property acquisition along the whole east side of the roadway. So you'll see in the cost that that's one of the reasons why the costs are higher for this option.
So pretty much every landowner.
Every landowner on the east side. The other issue with this too, it does make construction a little bit more difficult because on the south end of the job, a lot of those driveways kind of fall off right away. It's, kind of steep along the lake there. You really have to chase those driveways a long ways back to make everything tie back in. So a little bit of a design issue there too. The next option would be kind of a minimal roadway approach. 2 12-foot drive lanes, getting rid of the parking lane, 5-foot boulevard space, and then putting in that 10-foot trail. You could actually do this in a smaller footprint than what's currently out there. So there would be no issues with right-of-way or purchasing additional property. But we do get rid of the driveway with this option.
Parking lane.
I mean, parking lane, I'm sorry. Parking lane. I guess we'll have to see what the residents think, at that time, if they want to keep the parking lane or get rid of it. But. And then the next option is, putting that parking lane back in, but going to minimal lane widths, going to 11-foot lane widths, and then that 5-foot boulevard, and then a 10-foot trail. And that pretty much fits in the same footprint that's out there right now. So we're just kind of shrinking everything down to a minimum to try to fit everything back in there again. So those are the 3, options that we presented in the study and developed costs for. Certainly open to other, options. I'm sure residents will have their idea of what would be best out there, but those are the 3 that are in the report right now. And then just jumping back, there's a 4th option, was to basically do nothing. You could just go ahead with a mill and overlay project, but it doesn't really fix any of the the issues with the trail and the ADA. And then you are required to fix that anyway if you go into any type of reconstruction of the roadway. That automatically triggers doing the ADA fixes. And then the 5th option, it's not in the report, but Trevor wanted me to show it on the slide here with the intent of putting in the report is we could always just get rid of the trail. Just leave the roadway the same width, do FDR, clean up the curb and gutter, and just get rid of the trail, and then the ADA issue goes away. Again, I don't know how popular that would be with the residents, but that is an option that the council could consider. So those are the 5 options. And then just some of the other improvements, it'd be a typical FDR project. We would be doing some water improvements, again, those hydrants and the gate valves, LED lighting on all the lights, just kind of all those typical improvements that we do.
Yeah, a couple of questions.
Yeah, go ahead, anytime.
Okay, on that, like, do nothing, I'm just assuming, based on this, what you're showing us, that truly doing absolutely nothing for the time being isn't on the table according to what.
Well, you could, I mean, you could just leave the roadway the way it is, keep crack sealing, let it go. You know, let it go for as many years as you can, get as much life out as you can.
Is the road, I can't recall last time I drove on it, whether it was noticeably, is it something that the residents themselves would say it's about time, or?
It's getting there, it's getting worse every year.
It's not good.
Not good. And then tying into these other options, what is the 10-foot wide trail, the bare minimum? Is an 8-foot trail acceptable, or do we need to be at 10?
Originally, everything was 12 and ton. And then in these certain situations where we're trying to kind of shrink everything down, we've gone to 10. I can't recall ever going less than 10 on a trail.
We can't, because then we can't run our equipment on it. What we end up doing is busting the edges. If we go down to 8 feet wide, we're right there on the edge with all the car tires and the truck tires and stuff when we're maintaining it, and it just busts the edges off. We've got a couple little segments of 8 feet in our parks, right inside the parks, and the guys, we don't maintain them in the winter, so we don't run no equipment down them, so they work in the parks. But that could be another option. We could go to a narrower trail and then not plow it in the winter time. That, we wouldn't want to be running any maintenance equipment on it. So then what we would promote is no maintenance in the winter. Close the trail for the winter, go down to 8 feet.
But then you gotta take into consideration safe routes to school.
That's the problem, as it is, the southern half of this is all the safe route to school for the Forest View Middle School.
Option 5, why does the existing trail need to be removed?
If you're going to do an FDR project of that type, basically a reconstruction project, it automatically triggers the city doing something to correct that ADA issue with the trail. So you can correct it by removing the trail, and you take the issue away.
So you can't correct it and do FDR?
That's basically the other options. But you have to push that trail out farther to the east to correct the issue.
If we do an FDR or a mill and overlay or a total reconstruction of that road, and we don't fix the ADA issues and leave them as they are, we will lose our federal and state
Oh,
funding.
yeah, no, I want those fixed, I was just trying to understand.
Yeah, but we were just getting at, option 5 is the cheapest. I'll just put it out there. I mean, that's why I told Eric that we should show it. I mean, the cheapest option is the FDR, exactly what's there, not mess with the curb lines and take the trail out. That is the cheapest option to the city. But is it the most practical when we lose the trail? But I still think it's an option that should be presented out there so that people understand that it's costing the city a lot more money to go to these other options.
And you can see from the cost that the trail, varies between, 650,000 to about 500,000, depending on the option. So it's not, it's a big expense to replace that trail. Obviously, in the first option, it's more expensive because of the property acquisition required.
So in the unlikely scenario where the residents come in and say, take that trail out, is there some sort of conflict with that safe routes to school concept where we actually kind of need a trail there, or is that something we could just wipe out?
I think that's something you gotta look at, kind of the overall city and what you have, for your planned trail routes. It kind of changes your entire, trail system. That corridor was kind of always a planned, route, so you have to look at your entire system again and see, what you want to do with it.
We would have some trails that just dead end and don't have the kind of connectivity, and the circulation around the city. Right now, that trail comes from Southdale soccer fields down 48 to Knollwood, then Knollwood back up to Foley over to 48. 48 does have those wide paved shoulders, so there is people that go all the way around that whole circle. So you do start losing things like that in our trail system.
Just looking at the cost, you can see we're about 2.5 million for option one. That is the most expensive option, again, because it's the widest roadway section, and then it pushes that trail out. We got the property acquisition in there. Option two is a little bit cheaper. It's the cheapest of the three at about 2.2, because it is the narrowest roadway section. And then option three is about 2.3 million. It's right between the first and second option. And then just getting into project implementation, again, we treat it like any FDR project in town, where 100% of the FDR project costs up to 26 feet are assessed, and then pretty much everything else is picked up by the city. There's one difference in this one, and that is that we were proposing that 50% of the assessable costs would have to be picked up by the city. And I'll show you why in here. You can see that when we follow that procedure and the city picking up 50% of those accessible costs, we're still at about $7,500 per lot. That's getting up there for a typical FDR project in town. Just to kind of give you an idea, a new roadway in town, I think it's, oh shoot, I forgot the number now, 6,000 something for a road, 6,800. It's less than 7,000 anyway, for when you do a sewer and water project, so.
What were they, Brian?
$6,000 for
Yeah.
the forest view, and then with the 3%
Yeah.
inflation factor for future projects.
So that's kind of, when I was looking at that, when I kind of did this, knowing that, if you double this, you're getting way up there and probably in the range where you can't really justify those costs for assessments.
So 7,500 is the halved cost?
Yes, yeah. And the other reason I did that, if you look at the assessment exhibit, so all those red dots are all the lots that are being assessed, but you got a lot of unassessable frontage on this job for all those side streets and those side lots. We only assess the lots that are addressed off of Knollwood. So there's a lot of frontage on this job that doesn't get assessed. And then, excuse me, there's also bigger lots. This is kind of an older development, with bigger lots, and that just, means more for each lot to pick up.
So say that again, Eric. So you're saying if we did our full FDR assessment policy, we'd be at $15,000 per assessment?
Not quite, you'd be plowing these costs back in at 433,000.
Divided by 60, which is over 7,000. So you're at 14, you're a little over 14,000.
So it's just something that you're gonna have to think about as you move forward with the project and come up with justification on, what the assessment should be for this project. But I noticed this when I was helping with the CIP, the 10-year CIP plan, and kind of calculating assessments, looking here on out, there's a lot of projects like this that, the costs are up in that $9,000, $10,000 per lot if you follow your policy the way it is right now. Again, those are just estimated, but.
I was concerned about those numbers also. The problem with this project is all these side roads, so that leaves us all these corner lots where the people are exiting to a different street. And so that getting the assessment, it comes to about half of them. And it means the city's picking up a huge percent.
Yeah.
And it's still
Still up there.
Still a big number.
Yeah.
So it's kind of choose your poison, I think. Before we leave all this, could you go back and start over and show us what the different roads would look like again with what we have?
Those typical sections?
Unless if you've got more to do, keep going.
No, that's pretty much
Okay.
it for the report. So you want to go through these again?
Yeah, show us this is what we have right now.
the top one is what we have right now.
So we got 8 feet.
8-foot parking lane, 14-foot drive lane, 12.5-foot drive lane, the curb, and then that 12-foot trail right behind it.
And so there's no parking on the east side?
No, there's only parking on the southbound lane, southbound side of the road.
West side is parking, east side is no parking.
Gotcha.
So the next option keeps the roadway exactly the same, just pushes the trail up.
Still have the 8 feet.
Still have the parking lane, yep. And the next option basically gets rid of the parking lane, narrows up the road to 24 feet wide, actually a little wider because of the curb and gutter, and then pushes the trail up. And that can be done within the existing footprint. And then the last option is, putting that parking lane back in, narrowing up the lane as much as we can, and then separating the trail.
I asked this in fair and friendly, but because we've been kicking this dog quite a bit, but how can we have 8-foot parking lanes on this street unmarked, and the other streets we have to mark them, they can't park?
They are marked up.
It's all marked.
Yep.
So there will be no parking?
It's already no parking on the east side, that's all signs are up. And on the west side is parking signs. It's been signed like that since 1999.
So they can park on the west side?
The west side is parking, yes. That was designed like that, it's a state aid highway that was designed like that in 1999.
I know, but we just, in the road, we got them on both sides, signs on both sides down there.
Yeah,
Signs for
that's-
no parking.
That's no parking bike lane, so this one doesn't have a bike lane.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There's no bike lanes on this road.
That gives me some peace.
That would be a whole different issue if you want to just go to bike lanes and street and get rid of the trail.
One multimodal transportation.
Yep. There you gotta have multimodal, you have to have both the trail and the bike lanes.
Right.
So,
we're good.
this might be going beyond today, but I'm a little curious on, so option, whatever the narrowed lanes with no parking is, can you speak to it all? Yes, it's in the same ballpark as the other options this time around, and no, most people probably won't still be in the same house 25, 35, 40 years later, but that extra 8 feet of pavement that we're putting down, what would that cost difference likely be? I mean, you're adding a third of the pavement, right, roughly?
Yeah, it's roughly the cost, but the cost difference between option 2 and 3.
So as you go to your next mill and overlay, it should be a third cheaper.
Well, the way your assessment policy is for residents, it doesn't change because they're only being assessed for up to 26 feet wide.
Okay.
And then the city picks up the rest. So in theory, everybody should be paying the same, roughly the same for every project.
But it saves the city a bunch
The
of
overall
money 20
pie.
years from now.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
What he's looking at, Eric, is 20 years from now, when it needs to be mill and overlaid again.
Oh,
And
yeah.
now we've narrowed it down, that's gonna be a lot cheaper to the city.
Yes. Anytime you get the surface area down, it should be cheaper. Yeah. So like we were talking about utilities, this is just 3 options. If you remember the Memory Wood Drive project, we went through, I don't know how many options, and what we presented right away wasn't even close to what was finally done. So this is just the start of the process.
Absolutely. Other questions or comments?
I'm a little worried about going into a public meeting, Eric, and showing that we're gonna take and change our assessment policy for FDR to 50%.
Well, maybe you can leave that part out, and just see input on the road section itself.
They're gonna wanna know the numbers, though.
Yeah, then you have to look at your policy.
Do we show $14,000? Because what we really need to do is get the public input, but if we go into there showing that we're already changing our assessment policy, that changes it on all the projects citywide possibly.
That sounds like a question we all need to talk about at some point.
I think before we go to the neighborhood and start talking with them, we need to be on the same page.
I would
think so.
Might be something to
What,
discuss.
Eric, when were you proposing to start doing neighborhood meetings?
That's really up to the city. You know, I think in the schedule, you're trying to try to have something this fall. And then you could, you know, go for RFPs for this project, you know, early next year. So try to nail this down in the next 6 months on what the option's gonna be.
I think this is not for tonight, but I think one of the things we have to decide is what's the goal? Is the goal 7,500 and 15,000? And then we back into that. And
Yeah.
decide how we're gonna do that. Do we have the money to do that? If that's the goal, those two numbers, then
Right.
then we have to come up with something around that.
I think it's worth our having a discussion about how much should an average single-family house pay for the maintenance of the road in front of their house total as well, just to, if 15 is what we're currently saying you should pay, I have a hard time with that number,
Well,
just a road.
I have a hard time with that when we're charging 18 for the water, sewer, and street.
Yeah.
But what is our assessment policy now on a new neighborhood?
Like North Forest View
Yeah.
was 4,500 for water, 4,500 for sewer, $6,000 for streets, and $1,200 for Sac and Wham.
So that's the number I was talking about,
Yeah.
comparing the brand new street versus this year. If we arrive at what those two numbers should be, then we need to back into it.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, when we set that policy, it was recognizing that some of the streets would be FDR or a mill and overlay, and we were doing a full reconstruction because of sewer and water. And that's how we made the determination of the decrease in the street assessment to what the final number was. Here, sewer and water's there. We didn't make any adjustments to our policy, and our policy currently is at 100% of.
100% of 26 feet.
100%, so, I mean, we were talking about changing the policy for maintaining the road as is. We made the adjustment to the policy so that we can incentivize getting these neighborhoods sewer and water. So, if we get into the conversation of the assessment, we've gotta look at it, how this impacts the next 10 years. Because right now, we're going through the exercise and trying to figure out how to financially do it based on our current policy. And if we're gonna make that shift, we need to really have it now, it's worth talking about the CIP. Because typically a CIP is 5 years, we're already looking at an 8 to 10. We may need to stretch that out even further, just to make sure that we can
Yeah.
financially meet the needs.
Yeah, in that CIP, it does show anticipated assessments every year for these projects, and it would affect that.
I'm just saying right now, Eric, you need to write the report to show it's at 14 something, that's what our policy is.
Well, I mean, I would, we had, it's not like this is new, we've done this before. I think of like Excelsior Road, where we had all that back and backlot frontage. You know, the city did take part of that assessment, so we're not doing anything different. I mean, I could change it. The one thing I was thinking about is I could actually look at roadway frontage and take that percentage of, you know, unaccessible, you know, property and use that as a city cost. It wouldn't be 50%. It'd be
There's
less.
only 11 lots that aren't assessed.
Yep. So that would knock it down a little bit, but it wouldn't bring it down to where I'm showing it right now. Because that is, you know, that is how we were doing it in the past. That would follow the policy.
Yeah.
So what's the policy on mill and overlay?
Or
If we mill and overlay the street, what's the policy?
it would be assessed the same way. The 26 feet wide would be assessed, and then the rest would be the city.
And what is the cost of?
I haven't calculated a cost for mill and overlay on that road.
It's the same, it's 26 feet. What's the cost of 26 feet of mill and overlay?
Brian, do you remember what we used for a difference FDR,
40?
is it
No.
40%, 30% difference?
It's about 40, I think, yeah, mill and overlays are coming in at like 1750 a square yard, and FDR is at like 40, so, slightly less than half.
When in doing the CIP, I do remember like per lot assessments for mill and overlay were like, you know, $3,500, $4,500 a lot, somewhere in there. On past projects, we've been around $3,000 to $3,500 per lot.
So if this is at 15 for FDR, 40% of that would have 6 for mill and overlay for this project-ish.
Roughly. I mean, if you wanna see that number, I can put that in there.
No, I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around it.
I think there's a consensus here that we need to have more in-house conversation before we go out-house. I think the sooner the better.
I think we come back to the next council workshop and discuss again after we've talked internally. I think we keep at it, just keep talking it through.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not looking for a decision only, we wanna make sure we take the right stuff over to the public.
So what's the Pacer rating on this one?
I don't remember, do you recall?
4.
Alex? 4?
And that would have been in 2019.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Stick to it. I'll move on to Echowood Drive Railway.
Well, Aaron, introduce himself.
Yeah,
And then what we would really like is if we could gather around the table and look at the drawing
Okay.
and go through it. He's got some,
I missed the mark that Eric said, we had a presentation then, so we're doing it old fashioned way. I'm Aaron Ward from the Bowman Bank. I just dropped my daughter's off at this.
Want to come to the mic and just give us your name and where you are for the record?
Will do. My name is Aaron Warford. I'm a transportation engineer with Bowman Bank. So, we've got this layout here because we're going to document the items that are in the amendment request that were in the request for council action that I believe all of you have seen. The biggest change here, right now, we're requesting $137,000 in an amendment, of which $76,000 is a change relates to a pretty big redesign now, working with PennDOT at the 210 and those intersections.
There's a microphone under there.
I hear that now. I was wondering what this was down there. So, project at the pause, 2020, like a lot of things did. This wasn't entirely COVID related. It was a little bit because in working through the railroad coordination with BNSF, they weren't coming to town, they were gonna meet with anyone, it was their policy to do that. So we had to push that off till earlier this summer. We didn't get a face-to-face with them until then. But the real reason was MnDOT's 210 corridor study was going on. And that went through the process. We knew there were some things that were gonna change here with intersection controls, and specifically with us proposing to relocate this single Inglewood Drive. They came back earlier this summer and said a full access intersection at this Inglewood Drive intersection no longer meets their standards for how traffic is gonna be using 210. I was not a part of the project at that point. I know there's a lot of history with that. Trevor can, I'm sure, weigh in on. The original conversations always were that this was gonna be a full access intersection, is my understanding. I wasn't surprised to hear that they've changed that. These reduced conflict intersections have proven to work very well. They're working very well right now on 210, on the other side of 371. It provides a lot of access, but provides a lot of safety upgrades. When they do a corridor study like this, typically, they're gonna put some pretty hard and fast rules down on paper that says, we're gonna space full access signalized intersections at mile spaces. Between those intersections, we're gonna do things like right in, right outs, push the median through, or some kind of design for an RCI. So an RCI like this, it is really effective. It allows people to make this left turn into Knollwood. It allows people to make a right turn out, and it stops that left turn crossing 4 lanes of traffic, high-speed traffic. A lot of state corridors do that. So with that change, that added a significant amount of work that we've done as part of our contract, and we'll need to do to finish out this design for construction in 2022. So as this amendment request breaks down, $76,000 of the request for 137 is because of this. We need to do an ICE report, which is an intersection control evaluation. We need to prove that this would function well. We need to prove that it would be safe before MnDOT would buy in on it. We are right now in the process of getting our layout, this layout approved by St. Paul. Since this is an upgraded intersection design, it has to go to St. Paul plan review, and those types of things. And then the final design and the review and the construction cost increase are about $60,000 as broken down in this amendment request. The good news about this add, and Trevor had me add this to the RCA, is that $76,000 does require MnDOT to cost contribute to it. They will give 8% of the design cost to the city. They will give 8% of the construction cost to the city as part of the cost sharing program. So again, of the 137, 76 is related to all the work associated with the new Knollwood Drive design and construction. Other things to note, and actually the other big thing to note, is this little roundabout that's being proposed here at Isle and 4th. So the idea here again came out of some conceptual design conversations during that kind of pause period, was making Isle Drive kind of the through movement here. Instead of teeing into 4th and 4th and continuing south, this little roundabout really does improve access for all the vehicles coming in and out of this frontage road. We expect a lot more usage now of this frontage road because of the signal being closer for vehicles to come in this way to get into this major commercial area. So there's some cost associated with that roundabout design, a little bit of cost associated with the construction of that as well. We added a trail here, making this trail connection here from Elder and Isle on Foley. Another couple minor things I think are included in here related to just additional survey work that we had to do to get in the field. And then the last item that we added was bringing in one of the BNSF's approved firms to design this railroad crossing. So BNSF only allows a certain number of firms to do gate design, signal, those big flashing signals that have to interconnect with the signal on 210. So this firm is Alfred Benish. They're a national firm. I think the folks we're actually working with are out of Houston. So we've got them on board. Their contract is included in the amendment request as well. $17,000 I think in change. We have them on. They're gonna QA/QC all of our signal designs. They're gonna do the same for the railroad crossing itself, the gate arm placement, those types of things. So that was kind of a forced marriage. If you're gonna work with BNSF, if you're gonna do something like this, you gotta get one of their 2 or 3 firms on board. So overall, I think the number, original contract was $560, and this $137,000 amendment takes it up to $697. That does include all construction services as well as did the original contract. So this is really all the way through 2022. And the other thing that I wanted to note just quickly, in case there was a curiosity thing, we have been in conversations with MnDOT about splitting these 2 projects, not doing them together. One of the reasons, and I think to the RCA, we attached a schedule table as to why we're doing that. We're working right now on all this local road work, and we're gonna get that design done and ready for advertisement this winter. Because we have to bring MnDOT and St. Paul in particular into the design on 210, that's gonna take a little longer. We didn't wanna hold up the big city project that's gonna have to go through a much longer process to get construction done than just these 2 intersections are. So we're splitting the 2 projects. You might and likely will get 2 different contractors kind of working in the same area. But timeliness, getting construction started early enough to make sure we can finish, it made a lot of sense at this point to kind of separate them. So we broke that down in a schedule table, just, you know, again, maybe just as an FYI at this point. But I can sure, you know, answer any questions about that too, or any of this other stuff.
So I have a question.
Yeah,
So the 17,000 in the, as another contract to do the signaling is a drop in the bucket in the $600,000. But my question is, who's designing the signals to start with?
we are. But, so the way the railroads generally work it is, they don't want to be involved, but they want to have someone be involved on their behalf. So that's why we're bringing in Alfred Benish. They're the,
When you did your original proposal to us, you didn't know that?
it was noted that that would be a separate cost that the city would pay directly, in our original proposal.
You don't know until that year of that you do that contract, Mark, of what that cost will be. So in the RFP, we said that it'd be negotiated later.
And it made sense since we were doing an amendment just to wrap it into ours. We went into a sub-consultant agreement with them, as part of this, amendment, bringing them on board and putting them under contract with us instead of through the city. And I, you know, past experience, I would say I like that a little better too, because then we're directly working with them instead of having to send things to Trevor to send to, you know, it makes it a little more seamless in that coordination.
Sure.
Although it's never really seamless working with the railroad.
We did it exactly that way on site with SCH. SCH did the direct contract, we will then work together. But we had to hire the same firm.
It was
So
Benish
just-
as well.
Yeah.
They do a lot of it. They've been pretty easy to work with on past jobs for us too.
Are you, I don't think it answers this, but are you feeling comfortable that we've got everything covered now, or any more surprises, or?
You know, I think we're pretty much set on what segments of Foley are getting reclaimed versus reconstructed. I think we've got nailed down geometry here with MnDOT, with the signal, and we're hoping to hear back end of this month, early next month, that this is locked down too with the RCI at Knollwood. I think we're ready. I mean, we need to be ready on the local stuff because we're getting plans ready for December, and that's not that far away. So there isn't anything that can really change on the local segments. And I would say even anything here that they come back with at Knollwood or the railroad would come back with at the crossing is going to be very minor and not affect really anything.
We did some tweaking from the open house, of what we heard from the residents along here, we did some changes. No, I'm feeling confident that we're pretty well locked in on, I mean, until you get right down to, do we change a little bit of curvature?
Yeah.
Or something when you're right in the final design?
We're looking at utilities here, we're looking at impacts there. That's minor stuff
The
though.
roundabout and assessments to the businesses that's already been.
Well, we got a proposal, the feasibility study is coming to the Utilities Commission and City Council in September, is our goal.
Yeah, September
So
21st.
we've got a proposal, kind of like where Eric's at with his, he can come with a proposal, and then, yeah, it may take more than one meeting, because I haven't seen the final numbers, I mean, they're working on them right now. But we've met 2 or 3 times with Brad and Jeremy and I